So bro, intelligence inahitajika mtu kukaa successful. Really? Intelligence. Bro, unahitaji kuperform for the next 10 years. Ama na tena 20 years. Tena 40 years. Hautaniambia unakaa perform juu yao hivyo. Maybe unaweza get lucky. Lakini uta get lucky kila siku.
Intelligence works the same way. For instance, consider what actually happens when you first learn to drive a car. In the beginning, it consumes every ounce of your attention. In fact, you can barely hold a conversation while doing it. But after enough practice, the entire skill becomes automatic, runs in the background, and demands almost none of your raw processing power at all. That is intelligence as process being permanently converted into what Ackerman calls intelligence as knowledge. And this
Nino? Ganyo? Kwa nini? Si mimi. John. Jana asubuhi. Sasa unaiweka maji tu itatoka peke yake. Iweka maji.
And this conversion process from intelligence as process to intelligence as knowledge is what is called the investment theory of intelligence. But what exactly does this investment look like in practice? Well, let's say you work in finance, but you've always relied on analysts to interpret the underlying statistics. Investing your processing power means sitting down with a hard statistics textbook and working through the actual problem sets, not just watching a summary video, but doing the painful work until the concepts become permanent. A year later, you no longer need to reason through regression analysis from scratch. You recognize it instantly because you converted raw processing power into durable knowledge while you still had it to spend. And here's the question that immediately follows. If everyone has processing power to invest, then why doesn't everyone invest it? Well, that brings us to the second component of Ackerman's framework, personality. Now, most personality traits have almost nothing to do with intelligence. Being extroverted or agreeable tells you essentially nothing about someone's intellect. But Ackerman's research identified one specific cluster of traits that does, and it goes by several names in the literature. Openness to experience, need for cognition, or often what researchers call typical intellectual engagement. If we strip away the jargon here, we can see that it describes something very simple. Whether you actually enjoy effortful thinking, or whether you instinctively avoid it. To understand this, picture two equally intelligent people handed the same dense, difficult book. One feels a genuine pull toward it. You see, the difficulty is part of the appeal, and the challenge is actually the reward. The other feels resistance, a kind of low-grade dread, and then quietly reaches for their phone instead. You see, neither is more capable than the other. But over 30 years, those two orientations produce radically different minds from identical starting intelligence, because one person keeps investing and the other never does. And the critical insight here, the one that should genuinely change how you think about your own potential, is that this typical intellectual engagement functions like a stable trait, but it behaves like a habit. In fact, the research, citations for which you can find all within the book, consistently shows it can be deliberately cultivated. In other words, you're not simply born curious or not curious. But then, if that's the case, how do you develop this typical intellectual engagement? Well, the same way you build any habit, namely by repeatedly choosing the more cognitively demanding option and then allowing yourself to actually register the reward of having understood something hard. Read the harder book instead of the summary. Take the harder course even when the easier one would satisfy the requirement. Sit with the harder problem for 10 more minutes rather than immediately looking up the answer. And then let yourself feel the small but real satisfaction when something difficult finally clicks into place. Because that felt reward is exactly what trains your brain to seek out difficulty next time. Each time you do, you are strengthening the exact psychological trait that determines whether your raw intelligence ever gets invested at all. And the more you do it, the more the difficulty starts to feel like a reward rather than a punishment. Now, personality determines whether you invest your intelligence, but the third component of Ackerman's framework determines where you aim it. And that component is your interests. Ackerman's work, drawing on the vocational research of John Holland, found that two interest patterns in particular are strongly linked to building intellectual ability over time. What are called investigative interests, or the drive to understand, analyze, and figure out how things work, and artistic interests, or the orientation toward creativity, expression, and aesthetic complexity. And this part of his framework is key, because interests are like the steering wheel for everything else. You see, two people can have identical processing power and identical intellectual engagement, but if one scatters that engagement across a dozen shallow curiosities while the other channels it into 2 or 3 deep domains, only one of them builds the kind of compounding expertise that eventually becomes real intelligence. In fact, Ackerman's research goes a step further, showing that abilities, personality traits, and interests don't operate independently. They cluster together into what he calls trait complexes. And 2 of these clusters are the engines of fast knowledge building. The first is what he calls the intellectual cultural complex. Picture a person who reads widely across history and literature, is genuinely curious about ideas for their own sake, enjoys art and abstract conversation, and feels a pull toward understanding things rather than just using them. In that person, openness to experience, intellectual engagement, and broad investigative and artistic interests all reinforce each other, each trait feeding the others. The second is the science-math complex. Picture someone who's drawn to how systems work, who enjoys quantitative problems, who thinks in models and structures, and wants to take things apart to see the mechanism underneath. In that person, mathematical and spatial reasoning, investigative interests, and a hands-on orientation cluster together the same way. What Ackerman found is that people who sit high in either of these constellations build domain knowledge dramatically faster than people who don't, because for them, the ability, the personality, and the interest are all pushing in the same direction at once instead of working against each other. So here's what you can actually do with this. First, identify which complex you naturally lean toward. And the best way to find out is to notice what you reach for when nobody is making you do anything. When you have a free hour and an open browser, do you drift toward history, ideas, and how people and cultures work? Well, that's the intellectual cultural complex. Or do you drift toward how systems function, how to optimize something, how the mechanism works underneath? Well, that's the science-math complex. Second, once you know what you lean towards, pick exactly one domain that sits at the intersection of that genuine interest, and something that actually matters for your life or career, and then commit to going deep in it for the next year. Read the foundational books in it. Work through problems in it. Because when your natural interest, your effort, and a domain that compounds are all pointing in the same direction, you're going to build expertise several times faster than someone grinding away at something they have to force themselves to care about. And so all of this, your processing power invested through intellectual engagement, aimed by your interests, flows into the fourth and final component, which is the one that actually defines adult intelligence in Ackerman's theory: intelligence as knowledge. Ackerman argues that for adults, the real measure of intelligence is not how fast you can reason in the abstract. Instead, it is the answer to 2 deceptively simple you do. In other words, it's the simple questions. 1, what do you know? And 2, what can you do? In other words, it's the accumulated depth and breadth of everything you have built across your lifetime. And here's the most striking and most hopeful implication of this whole framework. Because your knowledge compounds, and because it enables what psychologists call transfer, or in other words, using what you already know to acquire new things faster, people who build it correctly can actually become more intelligent as they age, even as their raw processing power steadily declines. In fact, Ackerman's studies found that when you actually measure the depth and breadth of what people know, middle-aged adults match or outperform young adults across nearly every domain, the exact opposite of what a raw IQ test would predict. And the book's own example is instructive here. The surgeon Michael DeBakey was still performing complex heart surgeries into his late 80s, having completed more than 60,000 procedures across his career. Now, a sharp 30-year-old surgeon fresh out of an elite medical school would almost certainly have measurably higher raw processing power than DeBakey did in his 80s. But the simple reality is the following. It is far more effective to instantly recall the correct answer to a problem you have already solved thousands of times than it is to laboriously reason it out from scratch under pressure. You see, DeBakey's accumulated knowledge didn't merely compensate for his declining processing speed, it made him outright better than people with faster raw minds. And this right here is the hidden engine of Ackermann's whole theory.
Ndio sasa. Hapo sasa ndio naona anaanza kushikanisha. Unacheki akili yako ina process, unaona? Iko na processing power yenye tunaitanga ni IQ. Alafu tuko na vitu unajua, knowledge. Venye unaendelea kukaa mkubwa, hii processing power kama sahi tuko na high processing power kushinda watu wako juu yetu, unaona? Inaendelea kupungua venye unaendelea kuzeeka, unaona? Hapana, inapungua. Alafu sasa knowledge yako inaendelea kuongezeka, unaona? Kwa hiyo field yenye huko, unaona?
Kwa hiyo sasa pia hapo.
Unaona sasa, unaona kama like uje collect knowledge, kama uje accumulate knowledge mingi, IQ yako ikianza kupungua hapa mbele, wakati ushaka an adult sasa vizuri sasa, hiyo you're a young adult. Chenye unajua knowledge inaenda knowledge inatoka kutoka intelligence as processing kama ama IQ to intelligence as knowledge, unaona? Sasa kwenda hapa mbele knowledge yako like kama processing itapungua, kitu ita compensate in knowledge, unaona? Hiyo ndio kitu ina compensate. Kijana anaweza toka chini anafikiria haraka, lakini kama ushapitia hiyo shida mara mingi already unajua, uko na hiyo knowledge, lakini una processing power, lakini uko na knowledge, unaona? Na hiyo knowledge iko maji better kushinda mtu ana process, unaona? Sasa unapata aje, hata kama mtu amezeeka, ameishi kwa hii dunia miaka mingi, kama je accumulate any kind of knowledge, hata akiwa amezeeka aje bado ni fala, unaona? Haizifikiria haraka, hana knowledge ya kitu yote. Ina make sense?
Sasa ni unaendelea kuzeeka, una get knowledge.
Hopefully una get knowledge. Hopefully unasoma, unaendelea kusoma, unaendelea kuaccumulate. Unaona?
The more una grow, the more intelligence
inashuka. Akili yako inaendelea kuita kupena process. Sasa hii tuko youth. Na watoto wako much better kutushinda kuprocess hii dunia. Unaona? Lakini knowledge yao iko chini. The more unaendelea kukaa, the more knowledge yako inaendelea kupanda. So zina cancel each other out. Lakini kama unje accumulate knowledge, hakuna pale inapanda na intelligence yako inaendelea kushuka, unaenda kukaa kitu hakuna huko mbele. Unaona? Sasa hivi tuko very young na tuko na hii processing power iko juu. Tunaweza fanya ni accumulate knowledge nyingi. Ili processing power ikienda kupungua, bado tuko na skills. Zita account for that. You have vijana wenye wanatoka chini yetu sasa. Vijana by the time watafika miaka yetu, kama tutakaa tumeaccumulate kitu, si tutakaa bure kwa macho yao. Venye sisi pia sisi tunao watu wenye kujua yetu na hawajafanya kitu wako bure.
Unaangalia mtu unasema
hakuna kitu tunaweza kwa advice nayo. Maisha ni ngumu. Kila mtu anajua maisha ni ngumu bro. Patia mtu advice, si ndio? Patia mtu advice inaweza msaidia.
hata nilikuwa tunanishangaza nini? Utajiri. Hapendi kuambia mzee nilifanya hivi na hivi. Sisi bana naogopa usikie.
Ama hakuna siri kwa hapo.
hakuna mzee mwenye anaweza kuambia mimi nilipata hivi hivi. Especially hawa wazee wa community.
Ushajaribu kuuliza wakakwambia hawajui? Ama unaestimate wenye watakwambia? Obviously, lakini wewe ushajaribu wakakunyima. Ule mmoja ule wetu.
Ule hata hawezi kuambia. Sio hata ukimuuliza hawezi kuambia. Atakwambia maisha ni ngumu, ng'ang'ana kijana. Fanya kazi kwa bidii. Mzeka huyo akiweza kabisa ati uko hapo kwake iko job. Basi anakaa yuko hapo kwake kwa job. Sio msemi ngapi. Msikenga wasio ni wengi wana kama wakiwa ngapi. Wasio ni hawapendi kusaidia. Ya kitoa bob yake kwa mfuko. Wanga inamuuma. Bata kihitaji. Takwako yezi mgumu basi yake kutoka
ni mbaya.
You're not even trying. My wife told me this great expression. To get something you never had, you have to do something you never did.
Congratulations. You achieved failure. Failure has been achieved, thank God. Now, the only place to go from failure is to win. You have to achieve failure. You have to take it that far. Nobody wants to go that far. It's too scary. But you know something? I got news for you. That's where winning is. It always has been. Nothing's changed since the 70s. Nothing. Except people train not as hard.
The hardest thing in life is figuring out who you are and what you want to do for the rest of your life. It's a big decision. And once you figure that out, you wake up every day and you work toward it. That's what you do. It's impossible for you to fail if you know who you are, what you want to do, and you wake up every day and work toward it.
He's hooking. Damn, Ron, come on! What's the matter with you?
Tomorrow. Let's do it tomorrow.
There is no tomorrow. There is no tomorrow. There is no tomorrow.
If you pan it down here, you see it's about 3 o'clock in the morning and there's not a car or a person in sight. If you pan over here, it's the same thing. Not a car or a person in sight. People want to know where I find my strength at, where I get my strength. I get it from a lot of places, but right now, this morning, I'm getting it from, there's not a sub. There's not a car, there's not a person. Everybody's in their bed, sleep, dreading that it's a Monday, hate it's a Monday. And I'm loving it. I'm loving that. Where everybody's getting weaker, I'm getting stronger. It's not about the running, the swimming, the push-ups, the sit-ups. It's about what those things do for your mentality. You don't get better on the daggone couch. You get better by coming out here and getting every daggone day.
You don't start things and not finish them. You don't quit.
I think the most important decision you're probably going to make is who you surround yourself with, because you become like the people you surround yourself with. The distance that we can shrink between wanting to do something or thinking something should be done and it being done is a direct indication of our personal power in our lives. And so that has helped me basically think, don't be a powerless.
But if you could just find a thing and work hard at that thing, you'll realize through that thing that you can get good at anything with time and effort.
You don't get discipline from an external source. You have to get it from you. That's what self-discipline is. You get it from yourself. You get it from you.
And if your 20s, do all of that. Work day and night. Really do as many things, learn as much as you can, fail as often as possible.
What about work-life balance in your 20s?
Because that's the time to put in the hard work. Your work-life balance actually comes out later.
Hey man, look, this is what you gotta do, bro. Wake up and grind. Wake up and grind. Wake up and grind. Every day.
I was 6'1" and 300 pounds. He laughed at me. 7 other recruiters laughed at me. I walked in the recruiter's office and he looked at me and he said, "You're fat and you're black." I said I want to be a Navy SEAL. I didn't know there'd only been 35 African American Navy SEALs at that time in over 70 years. I came back 3 months later, 106 pounds lighter.
So there's a quote that I live by, early to bed, early to rise, makes a man young, wealthy, and wise.
You're not the smartest, you're not the coolest, you're not the best looking, but god damn it, you're something. You've got something that attracts people. They don't know what it is, you don't know what it is, but it's there.
Focus and fail fast. Focus and fail fast. Learn quickly. Try something new. And I thought I'd just pass that on because it's sort of what I have discovered over the years, is the faster you fail and learn, the faster you succeed. You actually learn to succeed by failing. You know, Thomas J. Watson's famous line, if you want to increase your rate of success, you must double your rate of failure. Because success lies on the far side of failure.
You do a little extra effort here. You take whatever's normal and you do a little extra to it. That's what makes it extraordinary. Look at the wording, ordinary plus a little extra. What's that extra? Now, that's what makes the difference, man. The extra rep. Getting up an extra half hour earlier. Saying you're sorry to somebody one extra time. Those little extras combined to a word called extra.
Ule mzee ndiye akae willing, lakini zamforce nahitaji sifai kumpatia time apumue. Sifai nimpatie time apumue afikirie. Nafaa nikae namsumbua, si ndio? Na zinajua si mimi simpimi, namwambia tu ukweli. Mimi sasa ndo nampima, Jovi sasa mtatoroka kwa ndazi bro.
Hata ni mimi nitaachia hiyo kwa. Atakuwa ananilaumu.
Atakulaumu aje bro? Atakulaumu aje?
Unajua kwa nini ndio? Unasema wewe umepiga hapo. Na kwa shapanga.
Bro, 100k hata akitoa 100k hiyo si donate hapa nayo. Hiyo si ni 1000. Hiyo ni $900. Hiyo ina blow account. Hiyo si domos. Lakini unaona ukipata hiyo do kama hiyo, una trade na ile strategy nilikueleza. Ile unaichukulia kama ni biashara, si kugamble. Ile kama biashara. Hizo sasa tumia $1 kwa hizo ni ngapi? Sasa kama ile ulikuwa na trade mara 100, hiyo ni mara 1000. Unaona? Sasa uta $200. $200 bro. Kwa hiyo do. Unajua una invest, hiyo ni kama investment. Itakuwa unajua unaweza kulia tu. Hiyo unaweza pata tu ya rent na food. Lakini sasa utaigrow. Juu hiyo inajua inahitaji compound. Ni kama business. Lakini sasa ukitoa hivyo haitaigrow. Utakaa tu na baki hapo. Lakini utaisurvive. Sasa actually nitaki capital. Si unikalie siku moja hivi uone kama sasa kuletea pesa hapa hivi. Si unikalie. Usiniache nipumzike. Ha? Sina nakwambia like tupushiane. Najua hatujakaa tukipushana kabisa. Tunasemanga.
Unaona kaa hivi ya ile siku kama nimesema hiyo ndio inaenda kufungua. Ukikosa kufungua leo hii ndio nyingine inafungua. Kwa naenda na hapo saa 10 nitafanya mambo yangu saa 10 na
You know. Hiyo ni skill bro, unalala hakuna kitu mbaya na hiyo. Skill. Unajua utajua ni nini unatumika skill. Steve Jobs alijifunzanga calligraphy. Hakuwa anaijua pale anaitumia, hivyo ilikuwa ina mbamba. Lakini more than 10 years later alikuja kuiapply pale fulani. Skill si kitu tunatoka ndani yako. Ni kama kuendesha bike. Hata kama utakaa miaka ngapi, uko better kushinda mtu mwingine. Sasa ndo unaona sasa hivi tukiwa hivi sasa hivi tunahitaji ku accumulate skills mingi. Unaweza fanya vitu mingi. Like wewe uko prestigious, like uko useful. Wapi hapo? Leo ni Saturday. Hii kitu inanitesa.
Ni wapi?
Nahitaji nione screen ya okay. Hakuna kitu inanishinda. I know everything. Hmm? Maina kwa mlango.